You attend a funeral. You wear black. You sit in a hard wooden pew and listen to someone you barely knew describe a person you loved. You leave flowers on a casket, shake some hands, and go home. By Tuesday, life resumes. This feels like the obvious way humans have always handled death, but the real answer is far stranger. For most of human history, death wasn't a service you attended. It was a problem you solved with your own hands, in the dirt, sometimes for days at a time. There was no funeral home, there was no embalming fluid, there was just a body, a hole, and a decision that something inside you refused to ignore. Why did that decision matter so much? Go back roughly 50,000 years into a limestone cave in the Zagros Mountains of northern Iraq. In the 1950s and 1960s, an archaeologist named Ralph Solecki excavated a site called Shanidar Cave and found something that shouldn't have existed according to the science of the time. Around one skeleton, labeled Shanidar 4, Solecki's team found clusters of pollen from flowering plants packed into the soil. Some of those plants, like yarrow and cornflower, weren't just common weeds. They had medicinal uses. Solecki proposed something radical for 1968, that Neanderthals, the supposedly brutish cousins of modern humans, had laid their dead to rest on a bed of flowers. That idea got a name, the flower burial. It also got decades of fierce argument. Some researchers pointed out that burrowing rodents called Persian jurds store seeds underground, and the pollen might have been carried in by accident, not by morning hands. That debate is still alive today, but here's what almost nobody disputes anymore. That skeleton was placed deliberately into a pit, not left where it fell. Something about that body mattered enough to move it, to dig for it, to return to that exact spot. This is where the story gets uncomfortable, because it forces a question modern people rarely ask. What does it mean that something non-human, or barely human, might have grieved before humans existed at all? The British archaeologist Paul Pettit has spent much of his career trying to answer that question properly by tracing burial behavior through the fossil record instead of assuming it started with us. His research suggests that deliberate treatment of the dead, digging pits, positioning limbs, sometimes adding red ochre pigment, appears far earlier and far more often among Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens than scientists once believed. Pettit's argument isn't that ancient burial looked like a modern funeral, it's that the impulse behind it, the refusal to simply walk away from a corpse, may be older than language itself. Think about that for a second. Older than language, older than the words you'd use to explain why you're doing it. And then, in 2013, the story got even stranger. Deep inside the Rising Star cave system in South Africa, cavers discovered a chamber so narrow that only small, agile bodies could squeeze through it. Inside, paleoanthropologist Lee Berger and his team found the remains of more than a dozen individuals belonging to a previously unknown hominin species, Homo naledi. This creature had a brain roughly the size of an orange, smaller than yours by a wide margin. According to Berger's controversial interpretation, it appeared to have placed bodies in that nearly inaccessible chamber on purpose, again and again, across generations. If that interpretation holds, it would mean a small-brained, non-human species was disposing of its dead in a deliberate location long before anything resembling religion, language, or modern human cognition existed. Many scientists remain skeptical. The chamber could have flooded at some point. Bodies could have fallen in by accident over time. But the debate itself reveals something important. The idea of doing something with a dead body instead of ignoring it is unsettling enough that scientists keep fighting over how far back the behavior goes. So why does any of this matter to you, scrolling through your phone in a world of hospitals, funeral directors, and prepaid burial plans? Because the urge never disappeared. It just got outsourced. Around 30,000 years ago, at a site called Sungir in what is now Russia, archaeologists found two children buried head-to-head, covered in thousands of painstakingly carved mammoth ivory beads, each one likely taking hours to shape by hand. That's not a body disposed of out of necessity. That's hundreds, maybe thousands, of collective hours spent on people who could no longer use any of it. No food was gained, no predator was removed, no practical survival problem was solved. What survival benefit could possibly justify that kind of effort? A similar pattern shows up at Kafza Cave in Israel, where bodies were found arranged deliberately and, in some cases, scattered with red ochre, a pigment that takes real effort to source and grind. Across continents and tens of thousands of years, completely unrelated groups of early humans kept arriving at the same strange behavior again and again without ever comparing notes. Some researchers think the explanation isn't really about the dead at all. It's about the living. A community that spends days digging, decorating, and ritualizing a death is a community sending itself a signal. We do not abandon our own, even when it costs us dearly. That signal builds trust. Trust builds cooperation, and in a species that survives almost entirely through cooperation, a costly, visible ritual around death may have functioned less like sentiment and more like social glue, holding fragile groups together through their worst moments. There's also a colder, more biological theory running underneath all of this. A decomposing body is a hazard. It attracts predators, spreads disease, and signals danger to anyone nearby. Burial, even performed by creatures with no concept of an afterlife, removes that risk immediately. Under this view, the emotional weight you feel at a graveside might be layered on top of something much older and far more practical, an evolved aversion to corpses that somewhere along the way got rewired into grief, ceremony, and meaning. Maybe it's both. Maybe the practical and the emotional were never separate to begin with. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. You still feel this pull, even now, in a world that has professionalized almost everything else about death. You feel a compulsion to attend a funeral even when you dread it. You feel uneasy hearing that someone was found alone days after they died, even though logically the outcome for that person is identical either way. You feel a need to visit a grave, to leave something behind, to say something out loud to a person who cannot hear you. Is any of that rational? Not really, and that's exactly the point. Every time you light a candle for someone, post a tribute online, or simply pause to say their name out loud one more time, you're running a piece of inherited behavior written by Neanderthals in a cave, by small-brained hominins squeezing through a rock chamber, by people in an ice age carving beads for children who would never get to wear them. You think you're choosing to grieve a certain way. Mostly, you're inheriting it. This is also why grief rituals persist even in deeply secular societies with no shared belief in an afterlife. You don't need to believe a soul goes anywhere to feel the pull towards ceremony. The behavior survives even when the belief system underneath it changes completely, which suggests the ritual was never really about where the dead go. It was about what the living need to do with their hands, their time, and their attention in order to keep functioning afterward. Look at a modern roadside memorial, stuffed animals and plastic flowers zip-tied to a guardrail for a stranger you'll never meet. Look at a war memorial wall, engraved with names nobody alive can match to a face anymore. Look at the candlelight vigil that forms within hours of a tragedy, organized by people who have never met each other, who somehow already know exactly what to do. Nobody taught you the choreography of grief. You already had it. So the next time you find yourself standing at a graveside, slightly uncomfortable, wondering why this strange, slow, expensive ritual still exists in a world of instant everything, you'll have an answer. You're not performing an outdated tradition. You're continuing the oldest project your lineage ever started, the refusal to let a body and everything it meant simply disappear without a trace. You attend a funeral. You wear black. But you are not performing a custom invented by your grandparents or even by your species. You are the latest link in a chain of hands that reaches back through ice age caves and impossible rock chambers, all the way to the first creature on Earth that looked at someone it loved, lying still on the ground, and simply could not bring itself to walk away.